Today's session is organized by WCF, Women Engage for a Common Future, and is part of the project Imagining a Climate Just Future, led by Oxfam Intermon in Spain, together with a consortium of NGOs from the EU and neighbouring countries. And in this webinar, we'll be introducing the EU Green Deal Toolkit for Youth, which was developed by WECF. And this toolkit shows why it's important to include a gender perspective in the European Green Deal. And together we'll take a brief look at what the Green Deal is, its main goals, and why it's such a central part of the EU's climate and environmental policies. We'll also touch on its strengths and weaknesses and explore why ecofeminism can help make climate policies fairer and more inclusive. We'll keep that part short because ecofeminism will be the focus of our second webinar, which will take place later this year. Before we dive in, let me quickly go over a few house rules so everyone knows how this session will work. First, this webinar will last a maximum of 90 minutes. We'll hear from 4 speakers who each bring unique perspectives. The session is being recorded, so you'll be able to revisit it later if needed. And interpretation is available in Spanish and French. And you can activate the interpretation by clicking the interpretation button, the globe, at the bottom of your screen. And finally, we invite you to use the chat at any time to share your questions or comments. We'll gather them and bring them in the discussion whenever possible. This session isn't just about listening to presentations, it's also about connecting and exchanging ideas. We want to bring together voices from local authorities, EU citizens, NGOs, and youth organizations to share perspectives and think about how we can make the European Green Deal stronger and more inclusive. Before we move to our first speaker, we'd like to start with a little interaction to get everyone in the mood. And we have prepared 3 short questions on Mentimeter. You'll see the link and the code in the chat, and we invite you to take a minute to respond. This will give us a sense of who's in the room today and what perspectives you bring. Oh yeah, we'll resend the link in the chat. Yeah. I hope I can read what's written on the screen. Okay, thank you for your answers. Curious about WCF, nice to know. Interested in ecofeminism because I'm worried for Europe's future and I want to know more about the Green Deal. We go on with the second.
Maybe before we go on, just a quick reminder, if you can change your names on the Zoom, if you go to your image on the right corner, there are 3 dots. There, if you click, there is then you can add a profile picture and then you can rename. Because for some reason, there are many Clara Pressman, but so if you can change your name, that would be great. Thank you.
And maybe also if you're like from an organization or an initiative, maybe you can add that as well. So we know where you're coming from. Nice. Insights and connections, hopeful perspective, yeah, critical eco perspectives, new learnings, EU climate policy. Yeah. Yes, hopefully we can bring a sort of a hopeful perspective. And then I think we still have a third question. How much do you know about the EU Green Deal? Well, the majority says, I think, a little or nothing, somewhat. So it's probably time then and it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker. And we're very excited to welcome Clara Pressman. She's the author of our new EU Green Deal Toolkit for Youth. And with her presentation today, we will be officially launching this toolkit, but also, learning more about the EU Green Deal. Clara, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Chantal. So I'm the original Clara. I didn't know I have so many sisters all over the world with my same name. So please, if you could change your name again, there was a problem with Zoom that for some reason everyone is having my name. Thank you, Chantal. Thank you, all of you, for being here today. I'm going to share my screen. Just a second. Yeah, there we go. Just let me know if you can see my screen correctly. Yeah. Great. So hello, everyone. So as Chantal said, I'm the author of the EU Green Deal Toolkit for Youth. We actually did this together with Chantal, and it was developed by WECF International as part of the Imagining a Climate Just Future project founded by the European Union. And today I will share a little bit about what this publication is about, which are the main goals, and what are this section about. And then we will let Julie, that is actually the expert of the EU Green Deal, that she will tell us a little bit more about this. So why did we decide to make this toolkit? Why did we create it? And it was because we believe that today we face big challenges like climate crisis, growing inequality, and the rise of the far right all over the world. And we believe it is essential for young people to engage with these challenges. And this toolkit is meant to bring the European Green Deal closer to you. And we also wanted to do this from an ecofeminist perspective, because we believe that it is essential to connect climate crisis and climate justice with gender justice. So this toolkit is not only a publication or a report, but it's more like, as the name says itself, a toolkit where you can find practical tools and advices and strategies to really act and take part on the EU Green Deal. So what's inside this toolkit? The publication have different sections that explain in very simple language how the European Union works, what is the Green Deal, also an explanation of why an ecofeminist perspective is necessary, and the gender analysis of 4 key issues, which are chemicals, agriculture, energy, and fast fashion. And most importantly, as I said before, that this is not just a report, but more a toolkit. This publication offers practical tools to help you take action through campaigns, workshops, and advocacy. The goal of this report, this publication, is simple, is to give you tools to understand, to connect, and to act. So let's start and think, and I will tell you why did we decide to bring ecofeminists into the Green Deal. And the main reason is because we believe that ecofeminism shows that the oppression of women and the destruction of nature come from the same roots, which are patriarchy, colonialism, and extractivism. So ecofeminism reminds us that we cannot protect the planet without also addressing inequality. It's both a movement and a way of thinking that links feminism and environmentalism. The climate crisis is not only about the environment, it's also about justice, power, and human rights. That's why in WECF, we think that the Green Deal must include gender equality and intersectionality to be truly fair. Ecofeminism reminds us to put life at the center, not profit or unlimited growth at any cost. So, as I said before, apart from explaining what the EU Green Deal is and explaining why it is important to have an ecofeminist perspective on the EU Green Deal, we have a specific section in which we explore these 4 areas of the EU Green Deal through an ecofeminist lens. So we're going to go briefly through each of these sections. So the sections are chemicals, agriculture, energy transition, and fast fashion. So let's first take a look on chemicals and cosmetics. So because of beauty standards, women use more personal care products, so we are more exposed to harmful substances. Many of them are still legal in the EU. Also, our bodies react differently because of biology and hormones. And another important thing to point out is that women from marginalized groups are even more exposed working in farming, textile, cleaning, and also in care and domestic work. That's why ecofeminism says that chemicals laws must go beyond safety. They also need to tackle inequality and unfair working conditions. Another of the key areas that we analyze through an ecofeminist perspective is agriculture and biodiversity. Farming is key for Europe's economy and food. That's why the Green Deal includes the farm to fork strategy to make our food system fairer, healthier, and better for the environment. But the EU's main tool for this, which is the farm to fork strategy and the common agriculture policy, is not doing enough from an ecofeminist point of view. Because most of the funding goes to big agro-businesses, leaving out small farmers. Also because women who play a crucial role in agriculture still face big barriers to land support and resources. That's why, from an ecofeminist view, we believe that the European Green Deal should support small farmers led by women and shift resources toward farming that is sustainable, inclusive, and value women's work. Another of the key areas that we explore in the toolkit is energy transition. And the question is if energy transition is really for all. The shift to renewable energy is central to the Green Deal. But the problem is that women remain underrepresented in this sector and face barriers such as lack of childcare and rigid work conditions. Unpaid care work done by women shape how energy is used at home. But the problem is that policies almost never take this into an account. And then there is also energy poverty. Millions of people in Europe struggle to pay for heating, cooling, and lighting. Homes led by women, especially single mothers and older women, are among the most affected. And the problem is that when policies stay gender neutral, they ignore these realities, and a feminist perspective can help us make the energy transition really fair for all. And the last topic that we cover in the toolkit through an ecofeminist perspective is environmental pollution. We all know that fashion is one of the most polluting industries. Europe's textile sector has always been powerful, but also built on exploitation. From colonization to today's global supply chain, where women and children, especially in the global south, still work in unsafe conditions with toxic chemicals. These practices haven't disappeared, they just changed the forms. So, what needs to change? From an ecofeminist perspective, we believe the textile industry must be transformed to put people at the first place. A fair fashion system means justice, equality, and sustainability, from seed to shirt. So through these 4 examples, we show why the Green Deal needs an ecofeminist lens. The goal is to make sure that no one is left behind, and we believe that through this perspective, we can really do and achieve this stuff. So as I said before, this is not just a report, but more a toolkit. So another section that we have in the toolkit, apart from these 4 sections and the explanation of what the EU Green Deal is, also, I didn't say before, we also have interviews to some experts. We also have a section dedicated to how to act. So here you will find simple ways to get involved, from informing and sharing knowledge to contacting your representatives, signing petitions, or sharing knowledge. We also point to volunteering opportunities, youth initiatives, and ecofeminist organizations that you can join. The idea is to show that there are many entry points. Whether you prefer spreading awareness, joining campaigns, or engaging in political processes, there is a way for everyone to participate. The important thing is that you actually participate. This section is meant to empower and connect youth with concrete networks and movements across Europe. And then also, because we believe that knowledge without action is not enough, in the last part of our toolkit, we also included 3 workshops. So these are 3 interactive workshops. The first one is called Collective Mapping. This workshop helps young people identify local resources to reflect on the Green Deal from an ecofeminist perspective. The second workshop is called Future Scenario Planning. This methodology was made by one of our partners of Imagining Climate Just Futures. And it invites participants to imagine different possible future, both positive and negative, to move beyond fear and to think of solutions. This workshop uses scenario planning to help communities to think about the future in the context of the social and ecological crisis. And the last workshop that we've included, it's Message to My Future Self, which encourages reflection on climate change and advocacy, highlighting the role of policies like the Green Deal in building a sustainable future. Through these workshops, you will be able to connect personal experiences with the EU policies and become agents of change. And to finish this presentation, I would like to highlight that we believe that the Green Deal is Europe's most ambitious climate plan. But as I said before, and as many of my colleagues today in this panel will explain, it is at risk. So we believe that it's very important that young people get engaged, to involve with the Green Deal, and we think that through the toolkit is a good way to take action. This toolkit is here for you to learn, to connect, and to act. Now you can download the toolkit here for free. It is in our website in WECF, in the where publications are. You can download it, you can use it, you can share. This is for you. And we will be very happy to hear that this is useful and that you can use it in your own communities, in your neighborhoods, in your universities, schools. It's really a tool more than a report. So thank you very much, and we can continue with the presentations. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I will ask you again for the participants that just share that if you can change your name, because I still can see many Clara Pressmans on the room.
Yeah, I think, yes, thank you very much, Clara. And I think the confusion might have been because I think an hour before this webinar started, Zoom sent out an automatically automated link in Spanish to remind people of the webinar. And probably that might have been the reason that a lot of people came in with this link. And the automated message was also sent to Clara. So maybe something went wrong with the way the email was sent automatically by Zoom. But thank you so much for this explanation. And also in the chat, we will have the link to the direct link to the publication on our website. And what I did forget when I introduced Clara, and I wanted to highlight what her background is because I didn't really tell you about her. She's a PhD candidate in administration and public policy and a gender specialist, and has extensive experience in gender studies and in applying feminist perspectives to policy making, both at the institutional level and at in grassroots initiatives. So if you have any questions for Clara in the chat, are there any questions right now? No? Okay, you can also ask them later on during this webinar. And now I'm pleased to introduce you to our second speaker, Julie Bos from Oxfam International. And Julie joined Oxfam in 2022, and she works on the link between climate, land and food, and leads work on European biofuel policies. She also works with colleagues on how climate change and inequality are connected. And before Oxfam, Julie worked at the World Resources Institute on international climate finance and studied climate, alternative economic systems, and public administration. And we're very happy to have her with us today. Julie,
Thank
you can take over.
Thank you. In the meantime, I started sharing my screen. I think that worked out. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm happy to be here, and I'm really happy to see the toolkit out there. I think it's a very useful tool to influence the EU Green Deal. And in my presentation, I will go back a little bit on explaining what the EU Green Deal is, how we got here, and where we are now in the European climate policy and the progress on the European Green Deal, and lightly touching on the next steps. Let me see. Yes. So what is the EU Green Deal? We will go a little bit back in time, and we will go back to the year 2019. Which was the year where the EU Green Deal was introduced. And to understand how the EU Green Deal came about, is important to understand a little bit what the context was in which European politics was placed at that moment. I think many of you know that in 2015, the Paris Agreement was introduced. That was a huge international success in international climate policy. And the science in that place was that we had a lot of IPCC reports warning about the climate effects. And in 2018, there was a special report from the IPCC saying that we really need to focus on limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, explaining what all the effects will be. So there was a lot of scientific consensus and urgency feeling. And in that context, we saw a rise of youth protests, and you probably all know Greta Thunberg and the Fridays for Future protest. In 2018-19, there were massive youth protests, and that was felt in the EU. And the EU, the European elections took place in 2019, and the Green political party that you see in the top right, they won a lot of seats compared to the years before, and also in national context, the Greens were winning a lot of votes. So there was a lot of urgency for climate change. There was a lot of political capacity to do something about climate, and there were parties in the European Parliament that wanted to do more on climate. So at that stage, the new European Commission, so that's the one deciding on the climate plans, had to bring a new plan for the coming 5 years. So they started in 2019, and at these years they had to present their plans for the coming 5 years till the new elections. And the boss of the European Commission then and still is Ursula von der Leyen, and she introduced at the end of 2019 the EU Green Deal. And on the right, you see the front page of the EU Green Deal. That was a vision document. So it's just the EU saying, this is what we like to see in climate, and we need to do more on climate. We have a vision, we want to change a lot. As you can see, they are very bad at presenting their climate plans in an interesting way. It's very boring documents, but the content was there and it was good. But just alone with a vision, you're not there. So they said we want to have higher climate emission, we want to do more. But then they had to start doing the work. And the first thing they needed to do was to set targets, to say, okay, how many emissions do we need to reduce to really become climate ambitious and to reach our goals and to stay within the 1.5 degrees warming. There was a lot of negotiations in that area, and in 2021 they introduced the EU climate law, and the EU climate law is the basis of European climate policy and sets out the targets for Europe. And the targets they introduced by then was in 2030 they wanted to reduce 55% of the emissions, and in 2050 they want to become net zero. And till this day, these are still the targets of the EU. You might have seen the phrase Fit for 55, and that refers to the 2030 goal. We need to be ready for 2030 to reduce 55% of our emissions. So that was the second step. After having a vision, the EU set targets, but then with only a vision and targets, you're still nowhere, because you have to reach the targets and think about how are we actually on the ground going to reduce these emissions. And there, the really heavy work for the EU started to happen. It was not that before 2019 there was no climate and energy policy, but 2019, the EU Green Deal and these targets were really an important moment to activate the EU and establish new policies and increase their existing policies. So in this picture, you see a little bit of an overview of the EU Green Deal. And we see that the EU wanted to do a lot in different areas or sectors. So there is the focus on clean energy in the energy sector. There's a focus on greening the industry. There was the building sector needed to green. You have the food sector. We have better ecosystem and biodiversity policies. There's improvements in agriculture and the food sector, and in transport. These were a little bit the different sectors, but there were also a little bit overarching topics like finding finance for the transition and focusing on the just transition that need to happen in every sector. So they're not separate in that sense. I think this is just one picture of the EU showing the overview, but beneath all these different pillars, so to say, of the Green Deal, there are many, many legislations and policies. So in the years between 2021 and 2024, when the next elections happened, they either improved tens of, I think, 10 to 100 policies, and they also introduced a couple of dozens new policies, and that was a lot of work for the EU, but they established a lot. And that's a bit what happened between 2019 and 2024. And now we are in a little bit of a different pace, because in 2024, as you're probably all aware of, there were new elections happening in the EU. And at this moment, the EU had a vision, the EU had targets, and the EU had set policies into place. But having the policies means that now the countries need to take action, implement these policies, and the EU needed to keep their ambition levels up and make sure they had all the angles of the Green Deal in the right place. But what happened here was that in the new elections, instead of a big win for the Greens, what we had seen 5 years ago, we saw a big win of far-right parties. And that was a big blow for climate. Ursula von der Leyen still is the president of the European Commission, and she's part of the Christian Democrats. She needed the Greens and the more progressive parties in 2019 to get support for that. She didn't need them in 2024 anymore. She needed the more right-wing parties to get support for her to become the president. So she didn't have so much. She wasn't pushed to increase ambition on green policies and climate policies, what is needed in the current context of climate, but the opposite was happening. There was a lot of pushback against climate policies, a lot of far-right politicians who are denying climate, and a lot of parties and policymakers saying we need to focus more on businesses and reducing legislation for them than focusing on climate policies, which is they mentioned that's a lot of burden on businesses. So this is a completely different context than what we have seen in 2019. And what happened then was that Ursula von der Leyen had to present a new vision, like she did in 2019 with the Green Deal. And the new vision was called the Clean Industrial Deal. And what you already can see here is that the word green is replaced with green. It still says clean, so she still keeps in place sort of the idea of we need to have we need to have an energy transition and we need to do something about climate, but it is less green than it was before. And then the focus is shifting a lot from green to competitiveness. So in the new geopolitical context, she said that Europe needs to have better businesses, more economic growth, more innovation. We need to support our industry to become the number one in the world. And their analysis is climate policy is hindering this. So what they proposed was to simplify the climate legislations that are already there. So they worked really hard till 2024 to put them in place. And then after the elections, they're saying like, no, maybe they're too complicated for the businesses. We want to simplify them. What simplifying exactly means, we are still figuring out. But there is a big risk that means deregulation. And deregulations means that the good climate policies that were in place, that they're stopped or abandoned, or the ambitions in these policies are reduced. And that's a process that's happening now from the beginning of this year. All the time, they take a couple of these legislations and they say, what changes do we need to happen here to make it better for businesses? And a good example is, at this moment, is the Corporate Sustainable Due Diligence Directive, and that's a whole mouthful, but it is the legislations that keep track if companies throughout the supply chain having fair supply chains and green supply chains. And it was a okay legislation in place, but now they are making it more simple and taking out a lot of the ambitions. What the result is of this is that the chances that we reach net zero in 2050 are way smaller, and that we see Europe no longer as the climate leader that it was, and that And that's a problem because climate change is not going away in the same time. Another good example here is that this year, the European Commission was also supposed to set an emission reduction target for 2040. And they first proposed to make this a 90% emission reduction target, which it could be higher, but it was an okay target. But instead of getting the target in place, and the deadline for that was the end of this month, there are many member states like France and Germany who are now saying these targets are too high. Our businesses need more space. We don't want to push so much for climate. We want lower targets and we want to do less on climate. And that's something we see for many, many policies happening now. So at this moment, the EU does not have a target for 2040, and we still have to see what's happening there. There's one other side effect that we're seeing with the new European Parliament and the new Commission, and that is that NGOs are getting more and more attacked. Normally, NGOs could visit the policymakers and discuss with them what they see as their plans, but now more and more NGOs are marked as entities that do not do good work, and they are scrutinized, especially by the far right. Sorry, that's my dog on the background making noise. And that makes our power to do something less effective. So Leslie, what's next? We have already discussed that we are backtracking on climate ambition in the EU. There's more focus on economic interest instead of climate ambition. There's less focus on climate justice. So specifically, the justice elements are being pulled away. And this also has an effect for the role the EU can play in the international negotiations. Because first they really presented them as the climate leaders in that space and tried to increase the ambition of other countries. But now they're backtracking on their own ambition. It's very difficult for them to still claim that they are a climate leader. So the result of this is that it's the work that we're doing on climate, the work that you're doing on climate becomes more and more important because we need more ambition instead of less ambitions. And I think the toolkit is a really good tool how we can try to get that done. That was my presentation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Julie, for guiding us through the current state of the EU Green Deal and what it means for Europe's climate ambition. And I know people were saying in the beginning they were looking for hopeful messages when it came to the Green Deal. But yeah, are we moving forward or are we going backwards? Julie, what are your thoughts on that?
Sorry, yes, no, I wish I could be more hopeful, but we've seen specifically in the last years that we are moving backwards on many policies because the basis was there. The EU set targets, the EU put policies into place, and the next step should have been a focus on implementation, a focus on increasing ambition, a focus on strengthening the justice elements of the climate policies because they were a bit lacking. But instead of that, we see the complete opposite happening. We see that the policies that were already in place are being criticized, countries are not implementing them well, and instead of introducing new and better policies, their existing policies are getting attacked.
Yeah. Yeah, we just have to work harder then even more. And that's also a reason why it is important for young people to stay active in this debate. Yeah, so I would like to, it's talking about young people. let's go back to the youth perspective and hear how young people are making their voices heard in climate debates. Our next speaker is Ariadne Prijn. She's a board member for public affairs at the Young Climate Movement in the Netherlands. And that organization brings together more than 70 youth organizations to make sure young people's voices are included in climate policy. And since taking on this role in July, she has been active around the elections, working to keep climate action high on the political agenda. And she's passionate about building a sustainable future that is inclusive and fair, and strongly believes in the power of young people to drive change. Ariadne, we are very glad to have you on board. Can we highlight Ariadne? Yeah, here you are. And to start, could you tell us about the Young Climate Movement and how it works to bring together the voices of young people?
Yes. So, hi everyone. My name is Ariane Prijn. I am indeed from the Youth Climate Association in the Netherlands. What we do is that we gather the voices of young people and we represent them in the climate debate. And as was said, we are an organization that represents 70 organizations across the country. And these are organizations from youth political parties to young organizations from banks, for example. So it's very diverse, and it's quite a task. And what we do is that we want to represent a certain vision from the youth in this climate debate, and we do that by actually bring our voices to politics. That's at least what my key role is, as I'm a board member for politics. So that is my main task. From our perspective, with the EU Green Deal, I'll just jump right into that. It's a deal which it's important to discuss the different perspectives from it, first of all. And that is what I'll be doing today. I'll be focusing mainly on the young perspective, and also how it is intersectional. And I would also like to focus on who is included and who is left out, because this is quite a particular point, which is very relevant to focus on. I'll first start by delving into the pillars of the climate, the Green Deal. It has already been mentioned before what the Green Deal entails, but I would just like to highlight the key sectors that it focuses on. And these are energy, industry, agriculture, and biodiversity. And when we talk about the EU Green Deal, it is important to also move away from these general goals and to zone in on the actual the policies that are designed for the implementation. And I would also like to highlight a few examples of these. The first one being the Just Transition Fund. This is a fund that is specifically designed to support regions and sectors most affected by the green transition. And one thing that is important to ask is who really decides in this Just Transition Fund where the money from this is allocated. Are youth organizations and women's groups meaningfully included, or do industry and government actors dominate the decisions? The second example I would like to highlight are the Critical Raw Materials Act. This is a legislation that secures Europe's access to essential minerals and raw materials for the green transition. And while it prioritizes industry and geopolitics, it gives little attention to human rights or gender equality in supply chains. And this is quite a concern in the way that it does these policies that are implemented. They also affect other policies across the globe. And that is something also to keep in mind when we delve into how these policies, how they actually take into account different groups in society. From our perspective, specifically as a young organization, we have seen that there are some issues with the Green Deal. If we zone into it, we do see that it does risk also leaving behind large groups in society, being women, being youth, and other vulnerable groups. And that is also something to zone in on, because we should ask ourselves who is actually involved in designing these policies, who sits at the table, and who is missing from the conversation. And to zone on more on these blind spots, one key issue that we do see is that the social dimension is often overlooked. And what I mean by that is that the policies are mainly technical and economic in nature. As I've discussed with the Critical Raw Material Act, for example, it focuses on sectors like energy and raw materials. And why it is important, it does ignore social justice and inclusion. And specifically, women and the youth are largely excluded from drafting decision making. And this does create a blind spot. The people most affected by the Green Deal have little influence over it. And that's quite troubling, specifically when we talk about the intersectionality of this issue, as policies do not affect everyone equally. If we take the example of energy price hikes, these may hit low-income households the hardest. Green jobs are often designed for male-dominated sectors, also leaving women behind. And rural youth have fewer opportunities to participate than urban youth. And intersectionality reminds us that age, gender, income, geography, that they intersect each other and shape how people experience climate policies. And without this lens, the Green Deal risks benefiting some groups than others. And when we focus on the youth side of this, it is very often the case, unfortunately, that young people are also left behind and not meaningfully involved in making or implementing things such as the Green Deal. And when we look at this deal itself, it is the case. And that has mainly got to do mainly with the fact that, well, even in the Netherlands, for example, it's hard for youth organizations to find meaningful ways to engage, to access EU decision-making processes as well. And it's quite concerning because when we take into account the fact that this deal does shape our future, the decisions that we make now, they will have a lasting impact in the very near future as well. And it's concerning that the young people are not sitting at the table. And it's not only unfair, it's also ineffective. Because what we do see is that policies are also stronger when all groups are included, obviously. And that does.
I just wanted to ask you then, but how can, if this is such a blind spot, how can young people then influence politics and policies?
That's a great question. It is not all negative. There are certainly ways in order to participate in politics. Unfortunately, the barriers are higher. For example, our organization not only focuses on national side of things, but also on the European side. We also try to represent our voice from a European perspective. What you do notice is that it is quite hard to find the right people to talk to, the right organizations, and everything is quite fractured. There's quite a bureaucratic system as well. So it does take a lot more effort, but it's certainly not impossible. And that's why it is important to also work together and to also to see where our chances lie, because very often different organizations have the same goal. And then it's excellent to work together because then your voice is only stronger.
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of young people across Europe who want to act on climate, but they don't always know where to start.
Definitely, yeah.
What advice would you give to them?
That is, yeah. What advice I would give is to consider, first of all, the focus points that you would like, yeah, to focus on, where you feel that your own strengths are, and to look for each other. So one good thing is to also look for, well, so for example, organizations such as us, such as the WECF, And also like the toolkit that was also presented today, that's also a great step. And I would, yeah, it's quite an interesting question to ponder on, because it does differ per person in how far they are active and engaged in wanting to make a change. And for others, they're more aware of the possibilities they have, the ways that they can approach it. For me specifically, it's different than for someone who may not be as interested in politics, for example. But we do see that there are different ways. You can also, for example, with the elections coming up, you can join organizations, maybe join political parties. Not only that, you can approach organizations such as us, where there's quite a low-key way to participate. Yeah, but it's also there is definitely a difficulty for a lot of young people in seeing where these possibilities lie, and there's still a lot of work to be done to also make sure that a lot of young people are aware that these options are there. So it's not perfect. It's not a perfect story, but there are definitely ways.
Yeah, I was also wondering, having listened to Julie Bos just now, yeah, the EU Green Deal is at a turning point right now. And from a youth point of view, what are your biggest hopes and your biggest concerns?
My biggest hopes would be that young people actually get a chance to sit at the table. As often young people are only consulted in a very minuscule way. It's very short, very brief. It's very often what we see is that there's already policy made before the young people are even approached. And that is quite a concern. A seat at the table is important. Recognizing that future generations should be much more involved. For example, with the organization, we are also looking into the intergenerational fairness mechanism. And it's actually a mechanism where for every single policy proposal, the youth are taken into account. And that secures the involvement of the youth. And that's ideal in this situation. These kinds of things help, and they do make a difference, and they make young people feel heard and feel seen. So I hope that that there can be further progress made in this. And what I am worried about with this Green Deal, as Julie mentioned, there is quite distance. We're stepping further away from climate, and it's more about competitiveness and making sure that the economic concerns have the priority. And that's great for the short term, but the problem is the long term, and climate and climate change is a long-term concern, and it does require long-term policy. So what I hope is that there's also more of a regard for that, and that's key in also making big steps towards climate change policy.
Thank you very much, Shadia, for showing us how young people are raising their voices and pushing, of course, for ambitious climate action. I want to move on now to the next speaker. Thank you, Ariadne. And that is that not only that the Green Deal has a strong influence within the EU, but you just mentioned also that it's international, it's also outside, but also for our neighboring countries, including Ukraine, where civil society is also playing an important role during war. And I would like to introduce now Anna Ackerman. She's a policy analyst at the International Institute for Sustainable Development, where she works on the green reconstruction of Ukraine. Also a board member of the Center for Environmental Initiatives, Eco Action, And with her background in energy, environment, and climate policy, she supports European organizations in shaping Ukraine's sustainable recovery and development. And we're very pleased to have you here with us, Anna. Yeah, and my first question would be, how does the EU Green Deal matter, especially for Ukraine?
Thank you so much for the invitation, and congratulations with the launch of the toolkit. It was a pleasure to also contribute to it. Before I jump into to talk about this particular question, I just thought, when you were discussing also with Ariadne with the youth engagement and so on, I thought how in my career, what really played a very important role was the Erasmus Mundus programs. So in Ukraine, I studied power engineering. So I graduated to become an engineer in the energy sector. But then I really wanted to get some international, experience, and studied then for 2 years in a few European countries, EU countries, on environmental and climate policies. And that was, it was a mind-blowing experience, because when you learn about these things, and I think people should be learning about that from the school as much as possible, that you can sit down with people from all around the planet in one group and actually discuss, what it means. What does climate change mean for you, where you live? And that really changes everything. And so then, I was lucky then to come back home and to bring in this sense that and everything I've learned as a young, not yet even professional, but after getting the degrees, but then coming back to Ukraine and trying to implement what I've learned about the importance of fighting climate change. So I think the education programs are really critical, and it's really, really important that the EU also continues investing into this, and also that the general knowledge about climate and environment, that it does become a part of all of the curriculum for us as we grow up in schools already. Really, really important. I don't know how, I guess there is some nice analysis done in the EU, how the situation looks like, but I know for sure that in Ukraine, there is a lot of work that still has to be done on that. Apologies. One more air raid alert.
Yeah, that's also something that
I will just move a bit to another place, but I will just keep talking. So now a few words about the importance of the Green Deal. Just 1 second, sorry for that. I have to say that well, definitely the EU Green Deal remains globally a very significant framework for decarbonization. It shows EU's climate leadership. It was thanks to the very important support of the EU that the Paris Climate Agreement was adopted in 2015. And based on so much that was done in decades, and also well, as Julie really nicely kind of explained how things were happened politically, that at one moment everything coincided in a way that EU Green Deal became possible, and it really laid this really important ground for so many policy changes in different sectors of the economy. And I think we have to really understand that, and this is the way I feel, is how I try to keep optimistic, that yes, this is a critical time when things can go worse, and we see some simplification of the environmental assessment procedures taking place, and really like easing of the environmental regulations. But at the same time, so much was done before that we cannot say that there will be suddenly a rollback to kind of old times when there was no such regulations in place. So luckily there was the time when a lot was done. And I can definitely tell for Ukraine that already after 2014, when Ukraine started working really hard on back then EU association agreement and implementing EU regulations in different sectors, also on environment. And then once the EU Green Deal came into being, that also played a role. Last year, so during the big wartime already, Ukraine adopted the climate law that basically explains how Ukraine's climate governance would look like, and it also finally sets the 2050 climate neutrality target for the country. And this is something that we've been kind of trying to explain, trying to advocate for many years. But it's thanks to all of the processes that happened before, thanks to all of other things and other changes in other sectors and EU Green Deal itself, that it kind of became so important that it was clear that there is no other way. This is the way we go. Yes, there is many complications on this path, but it's clear that we have to we have to be there. We have to do everything by 2050 to get to this goal. So it really inspired, I'm sure, not only Ukraine, but other countries. As our countries moving toward the EU membership, we are learning to align all of the policies, including very complicated ones now that we have to adopt the emissions trading scheme, again, during the wartime. Well, we are doing our best, I think, in the current circumstances. To see what we could do. What is critical here, though, and Julie also mentioned that, and there was this big graph that finances and resources are really important to implement the EU Green Deal. We need both money and people to make the change happen. And very often the cleaner technologies, they have the higher upfront cost. Perhaps for some countries, where interest rates are lower, it may be a bit making more sense to do this. In a country like Ukraine, this is really complicated. And so when we were trying to rethink in the last few years, since 22, what does it mean for us, to be moving ahead with these things? We had to be searching for solutions that make sense today. And even though these upfront investments into things like renewables are higher still than into fossil fuel-based generation in the energy sector, now we have the added on aspect, and this is security. Security of supply, and the fact that many people now understand how precious having electricity actually is. So this really, Russian attacks on Ukraine's energy sector really strengthened this understanding. And also, in addition to that, the mere fact that Russia's main source of income to be fighting and continuing this aggression against Ukraine is coming from fossil fuel exports. This has to give us a sign and understanding how important it is, and how important it is to understand that we can do better. Because there is the slogan that fossil fuels fuel war. We feel it directly on our heads every single day. So we really have to do everything possible to make energy transition happen, energy transition to clean energy, because when you have clean energy, you basically don't need the constant supplies of fossil fuels from somewhere else. You have your wind turbine turning where you are. You have your solar panel working once it's installed where you are. There is, of course, question now of critical minerals, but I will not be touching on that. That's also an interesting one. But in any case, there's a huge difference in approach of how, what does it mean? What does this clean energy transition mean? And I think, again, we are learning it hard way, and trying to kind of explain how important it is for Europe, for whole of Europe, to stop the nonsense, all of these imports of the fossil fuels from Russia and from also other countries, and to move ahead with the energy transition as quickly as possible. Now coming back maybe to the general trajectory of the Green Deal and so on and of climate policies. did set some ambitious targets. The trajectory is definitely uncertain. All the foundation, as I mentioned, is quite strong, but there is so many challenges ahead. At the same time, I think I'm always thinking back during the first presidency of Donald Trump in the U.S. And how when U.S. quit Paris Agreement for the first time. I don't know if you're following, but they already quit, of course, second time once he became president again. But it doesn't mean that everything stops and that the US just, it's just an example. I just wanted to give US as an example, but I think it's also like a worthy one. It doesn't mean that everything that was done before stops. Absolutely not, because does the development of clean energy fully stops? Absolutely not. There is still continuation of what was started. There is this inertia. And also what happens during this very uncertain times, the local solutions matter as never before, as local as possible. So then municipalities play a big role, civil society plays key role. When US quit Paris Agreement the first time, the American cities were, saying we are still in the climate, we are ready to do everything for climate. And many of them joined, and they said, doesn't matter what happens up there, we are still in. And you can see the same thing all over Europe. So many cities are already progressed so much that, again, it doesn't make sense to roll back. But then, and this was already mentioned briefly, the political shifts and especially the rise of the far-right movements, this of course pose risks, again, to roll back and to deregulation and so on. And
of
working
course,
in this
probably,
condition,
I'm sorry, and probably also the expanding role of Russian disinformation in the European Union.
Absolutely. Disinformation indeed, and we are living in types of hybrid warfare. And actually, I'm in Kyiv now. I'm talking with you about green policies, while we have drones flying in our hands, but we still have to keep working. This is our hybrid warfare. This is how it looks like. There is so many things happening
Maybe
at the same
people weren't
time.
aware of it, but you had an air raid alert, and now you went back to the bathroom again to be more safe.
Crazy times. So, I just want to say how again things look like now with the far right. That in some of the countries where we have the far right governments, it's impossible to pronounce the word green or sustainable. And Julie mentioned that, right? It just you have to be finding other approaches. You have to be talking in their language and find a way to approach them nevertheless, because you want to actually get things done. And then many environmentalists also become economic experts, and they learn to talk in financial terms, but at least to explain, because in the end, we have to find approaches to people. To, of course, this kind of the governments, but also to the people who vote for these politicians. And I think one of the important messages for me would be to make sure that we are not stuck within our bubbles, and to make sure that we try to understand that we don't create the barriers, and that we don't do the same as Russian disinformation is trying to do with us. They try to make sure that we are split as much as possible and that we cannot work together anymore. So we have to understand each other as much as possible. And again, very often those who vote for the far right, they may not even like everything those far right people are saying, the politicians, but then they are very often from the vulnerable groups who actually suffer from, for example, energy poverty. And one of the solutions to the energy poverty could be those very things that we call climate measures. But for them, it's not about climate, for example, but it would be about energy efficiency and energy saving technologies and, just name it. And it makes total sense, and it's absolutely normal to just find in another language. So we are living again in these times, but yes, we have to adapt. And this is actually what we are also learning again in Ukraine through security discourses, through discourse about, again, perhaps economic reasoning behind anything we do, considering we don't have enough resources as a country to rebuild green and better with more expensive technologies and so on. But we have to find this reasoning, and it's very important for all of us. So these are kind of the few things that I really wanted to say, and to underline how, again, we see here in Ukraine how to keep the country resilient, and I'm sure this is the case for the democratic countries all over Europe, how it is important to make sure that we are, how decentralization is important in energy sector, in all of the other sectors. Think about big energy systems, big energy plants that can be, hit at some point, and then you have no energy for thousands and thousands of people, for cities. So when you decentralize, your solution in the end is clean energy and is new technologies that we already have today. This is even the case for smaller agriculture, for smaller farming, and this is the case for so many things that actually we work on, and that we call climate, climate measures and so on. So this is our wartime experience, but this is also security experience, and this is something that we learned again the hard way. But I think it's important to make sure that we kind of talk this language now with everyone. And then maybe to sum up, all of this is, just to say how important it is to make sure that young people in civil society are there, they remain engaged, to keep climate high in the political agenda. Again, even if we change the wording, but it doesn't matter again, but we understand what we are talking about. We have to, find these new solutions, address these vulnerable groups. And there are some things that we can definitely do. And I really like the idea, for example, and what the UK did in France and with climate assemblies. If you haven't heard about them, I will drop the link maybe in the chat. Do read about them. When the whole of society is represented by a group of 100, 500 people, they learn about climate, and then they suddenly, open their eyes and they understand how important it is, and they become the voices of just people from a village or anywhere who actually talk about it and know about the importance of these issues. We have to be talking with media, we have to be working, and we have to be finding ways to explain with simple words some of these complicated things. And I believe a lot in shared values and collective action. That is the only way to secure the more sustainable future. So we have to be definitely working together. There is some things we can do by ourselves, but really that much. And this is why when WECF is also the part of the larger platform called Build Ukraine Back Better, where we have more than 90 organizations at the moment from all over across Europe who are working on green and sustainable reconstruction of Ukraine. Because these are kind of common voices where we can, get together and understand, what has to be done and set priorities. And just before, this is my very last thing I wanted to say. Just now, while listening to all of you, I also saw that a quote from Alexandra Matviichuk, who is the Nobel Peace Prize. She was recognized as a Nobel Peace Prize laureate in 2022, human rights lawyer. And she said that democracies need to win because only the spread of freedom makes our world safer. We have to just remember that we have to do everything to safeguard what we have on the first place. Yes, of course, we want to dream bigger every time, but to make sure that preserve what we have, we preserve our democracies, our rights, and that we stay free as much as possible. Because unfortunately, there is too many regimes now who prefer people not to be free. And then with that, we unfortunately see that the same regimes fight, do everything that we stop the fight against climate change because they profit from things like fossil fuels and so on. So that was kind of it from my side, and I will share with you.
Small message of hope. At least
Right.
let's try and preserve, safeguard our freedom. I was wondering if there were any questions for you. I'm not sure if they were in the chat, but I was thinking myself, thinking also about the situation in Ukraine. I was just wondering how you see the balance between there are so many short-term needs. There's so many things that need to be done on a humanitarian level as well. How can this be like, yeah, how do you see the balance between long-term climate goals and what is actually needed on the ground right now?
I mean, we are, of course, we are. A lot is needed right now. We need to do everything to stop the war in Europe that is happening today. So this is our security question of today. But then I think the next biggest security question is the climate change. As I said, we have to. It's the time of multiple crises. Nothing new I can say here, and we have to be working on both fronts, and we have to be definitely. And then make sure that, where we see these fronts coinciding, and as I mentioned, this reliance on fossil fuels that can help to actually fight both issues. We have to do everything as quickly as possible that we address these issues. Of course, in Ukraine, we have lots of some of the most important things are people and resources to be just keeping on running. And so these are kind of the things that do matter. But at the same time, I didn't mention this now, but the recovery and reconstruction of Ukraine does go on, because once the buildings get damaged, unless it's really close to the front line now, they're being rebuilt. If you go to Kharkiv, the city where I'm from, in the east, they are replacing windows all the time, because there is a hit, there is a blast, windows are gone, then they replace them with newer windows. So you go along the city with only new windows, or they're closed. But there is also bigger reconstruction projects going on, and what we try to advocate for is that, in addition to, I mentioned energy, so I don't know, having solar panels on hospitals and so on. These are some of the basic things that we thought were useful, and they scaled up a lot since 2023. We are also trying now to show what does it mean to rebuild green, first pilot projects of green reconstruction of housing, building up to the newest EU standards or even better standards, or whatever we can do, again, that makes sense economically speaking in Ukraine today. And at the same time, I have to say that we are now in a very uneasy and complicated situation with protecting our environment. The environmental impact assessment procedures are being simplified or almost gone for all of the kind of new projects. And this is because we have to choose between either keeping economy running or working on environment, and still keeping that part. So we are now trying to do everything to make sure that we at least have some environmental assessments done for different projects. So that's the reality. But then in the end, I think people are, I'm sorry, I'm talking for too long here, but just to say that when all of the surveys done in Ukraine show that people want to save the environment. They understand how important it is. They see how it's getting destroyed, and then like how things are just burning on their eyes, water is getting polluted, and so on. They understand the importance. The big majority of Ukrainians want to do something about it, and the same. We are not far from all of the other EU countries on average on caring about climate change. So we also want to do that. So it means that people understand. It's just it's a matter of us, the kind of what we do, how much we can do today. But we are trying to help with that with our platform.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Anna, for sharing your insights from Ukraine, and also for reminding us that we can also do a lot here, and that even in the most difficult circumstances, there's space for building a sustainable future. And I would like to, well, we've heard today about EU policies and the youth movement and the experience from Ukraine. And we launched our EU Green Deal Toolkit for Youth today to support young people everywhere in making their voices stronger and their actions more effective. And before we move on to closing, we would like to hear from you once again. And we will show again the Mentimeter. And we have 3 short questions for you to answer now that you've heard all 4 guests, speakers, and your input will help us also understand what you have taken away from today and how you see the role of young people in shaping Europe's climate future.
Can you
yeah.
please put again the QR code? We didn't have time
Yeah, or maybe
to
in the chat.
scan it, or in the
Yeah.
chat. Yeah. Thank you.
And I think Anna also wrote down some in the chat that she put down the link of the platform. Let me see. Build Ukraine Back Better, the link, so everybody can go and visit the website. Yeah. Well, what do you think should be a priority in the EU Green Deal? That's the question right now. I think the screen is showing everything. But I think people are adding. Hey, let's just wait for.
Oh, is it January?
Yeah. What do you think should be a priority in the EU Green Deal? Justice as one of the most important words. Youth inclusion, youth representation, just transition, sustainability of lives. Yes, shall we go on to the next question? Where do you think we stand with achieving the EU Green Deal by 2050? It's more on the side of disagreeing. So there's still a lot of work to be done. So let's say we are not very hopeful, unfortunately. And then the 3rd question, I feel empowered and hopeful that a fairer Europe is possible. Oh, that's nice. Aside from the EU Green Deal, but a fairer Europe. Yes. Okay, that's also we had a few like hopeful remarks and things that we can work on. You can check out our website and find the EU Green Deal Toolkit for Youth and find out actions don't have to be big. You can do, you can look in the toolkit and see what you can do in your own life and in your own circle, social circle. And also on behalf of the organizers of today, I want to thank all our speakers for their contributions and all of you for joining us and sharing your views. If you have any questions, I'm not sure if there are any questions in the chat. No? You can always send us an email afterwards and we will forward the questions. And the conversation, of course, doesn't stop here. The Green Deal Toolkit is now available for you to use. And we hope it helps, and especially to make your voice heard. Thank you very much. And we look forward to working together for a fair and sustainable future. And we will start organizing our second webinar, which will be mainly focused on the EU Green Deal and ecofeminism. And that's probably going to be aired early December. But we will keep you updated on the second webinar. Thanks from all of us here and from Clara. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks to the speakers, and a special thank to Anna that you were here, even the difficult situation in Ukraine. So thank you very much. The toolkit is now available. So as we said before, this toolkit is for you. So use it, and hope to see you very soon, and hope to see you in our next webinar in December. You are muted, Chantal.
Still a last remark. We are also, for those in the Netherlands, we are organizing a conference and also with a workshop on the EU Green Deal at the University of Twente, together with the Green Hub of the University of Twente on the 8th of October, Wednesday, the 8th of October in Enschede at the campus. So anyone who's in the area, you are very welcome. It's for free and it's a whole day conference as part of this project, Imagining Climate Just Futures. Thank you very much for joining.